Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The college football playoff brackets are out, and by far, as just a pure college football fan, the first round that I am most excited for, Tennessee going up to Columbus, Ohio. What makes this matchup special, at least in my opinion, both of these teams at their ceilings, playing their best football, can win national championships. I don't think there's any question mark about that, and you're going to see some really intriguing matchups, right? Tennessee, they want to run the football with one of the best running backs in the country, Dylan Sampson, going against an Ohio State front seven that is one of the best front seven stopping the run that you see in the country. That to me feels like probably the biggest storyline heading in. But I'm just hoping we get both of these teams playing clean, good football. Because if you get that, this is going to be one of the better college football games that you see in all of 2024. Fired up to get into it now. Before we do it, as always, Tennessee fans, Ohio State fans, college football fans, let it fly in the comment section. Ohio State coming in as about a touchdown favorite at home. Kirk Herbstreit just said he just doesn't even know if Ohio State wants to play at home again after Michigan. Horrible. This is a massive advantage to get. The alternative is going and playing in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so I think the Ohio State Buckeyes want to be in Columbus for this one. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I want to start with this Tennessee offense going up against an Ohio State defense that, again, when you talk Ohio State, Ryan Day, defense isn't always the first thing you talk about. This has been the best, if not one of, if not the best defenses in the country, specifically stopping the run, only giving up 2.9 yards per carry. This Tennessee rushing attack versus this Ohio State defensive front, how are we feeling about that one?
No, I don't think they're going to shut this Tennessee team down completely. I don't think anyone's really done it. Even Georgia, Georgia's probably the closest. They still ran the ball okay. That is Tennessee. Again, what I'm looking for from this Tennessee team is, can they get something going through the air behind it? Because that's been what their issue's been. They've always run the ball well, and they're definitely playing a really good front seven, and that's going to be a really fun matchup. But at the end of the day, if Tennessee, when they're good, they're working stuff off of their rushing attack and stuff through the air, that's where it starts.
That's probably – so I led with the biggest storyline being this Tennessee rushing attack versus this Ohio State front seven. I should just include this Ohio State defense. I don't think there's better safety in the country coming down and supporting the run than Caleb Downs. If Tennessee wins this game, Nico's going to have a good football game, which is kind of stating the obvious. One of the more intriguing matchups, we all know Ohio State and these safeties, they want to fire downhill and get involved in the run game. We saw that against Michigan. Now, Michigan wasn't really able to capitalize anything down the field because the quarterback wide receiver play is not good enough. Tennessee has that capability. And to me, this is probably the biggest storyline. If you covered up the scoreboard for me and just told me what was Nico's completion percentage on 20-plus yard throws down the field. This is something that is a part of this Tennessee offense when it is firing on all cylinders. You're hitting the explosive play to supplement the run game. When Tennessee's not playing their best football, they're struggling pushing it down the field with not only Nico struggling, but the pass catchers making some plays down the field as well. That, to me, can you run the football well enough to maybe have this Ohio State aggressive defense starting to fire downhill, and then could Dante Thornton, Squirrel Wright, Brew McCoy, whoever, Mikey Matthews, whoever it is on the outside, can they go make plays down the field? That to me is where this game is won or lost.
Dante Thornton's the obvious one because he's been the one hitting the big plays. One guy I think can be a real problem is Brew McCoy, because I look at how grabby these secondary players, especially on the boundary, are for Ohio State. I mean, both of them are, they'll take their penalties now. And Brew McCoy, when he's on and playing physical and playing dominant, he's a guy who, if you're a grabby cornerback, he does draw those type of penalties. He is good in those one-on-one matchups, being able to just physically impose himself on corners. He's a guy, to me, I don't think they've really gotten him going yet, especially towards the back end of the year. He's been pretty quiet. I think he's a guy because, again, you said it, they like to leave their corners one-on-one man coverage matchups because they believe in those two, which I would too. I think it's a really, really good tandem, but they have had a propensity to take some penalties and give up some plays down the field. McCoy is a guy who I think.
So to me, the biggest question mark here is how do the refs call this too? And you're going to get a feel early because you're right. Ohio State, especially a guy like Davis and Igbinosun, who is, again, you're looking at Denzel Burke, Davis, and Igbinosun as two of the best cornerbacks that you see in the country. They do want to put hands on wide receivers. There are some games where they let it fly a little bit. And then there are some games where they get called for. Like where are the refs standing on the pass interference calls? Because we know we get a lot of inconsistency with the pass interferences. Are they going to be nitpicky with it? Are they going to be lenient with it? That's another storyline. Dill, I look at that match with Dante Thorne on maybe a guy like Denzel Burke. Denzel Burke, very good cornerback. And Ohio State on aggregate has been really good not giving up the big play. Like you look at the secondary numbers, they'll give you some stuff underneath a 60% completion percentage. That's only 55th in the country. They only let you have 5.5 yards per pass attempt. That's top 10 in the country. But when they've played offenses that really can threaten you down the field, I think most notably Oregon, you saw them be able to hit some of those game-changing plays. Denzel Burke, very good cornerback. The long speed is certainly questionable. Dante Thorne's big, and that dude can cook, I believe, a 10.55 in the 100-meter coming out of high school. Can you let down, especially if you're starting to walk these safeties in the box to stop the run?
And that's how Ohio State's played it pretty much all year, so I expect to see it. Now, again, Tennessee's ability to hit those big plays has been relatively inconsistent.
Yeah.
You do it at times, and you know they have the talent to do it, but Nico's missed some. Their wide receivers haven't always been on in the way I think they need to be on.
Yep.
So it's been like kind of a two-pronged issue, if you will. But when it's been clicking, it's looked really good. Like I go to that Kentucky game. That's a really good-looking game. The second half against Vanderbilt, that's a really good clicking offensive field. They look like that. They're
what version do you get of Nico? And that largely depends on where this Tennessee team goes in the college football playoffs. Last storyline here, pass rush for Ohio State. Like if you do want to push the ball down the field, that means you have to drop back and sit in the pocket a little bit. Jack Sawyer, JTT, a ton of hammers on the inside as well. They're set, and this is where Ohio State's taken that step up from last year. They're sacking the quarterback 10.5% of the time. That is number 2 in the country. Tennessee has had, as good as that offensive line is in the run blocking department, sometimes they break down in pass protection, especially a game against Georgia. What does that matchup look like? Probably the last.
I think Ohio State, like you talk, like they feast on some bad teams. I do think this is like a huge game for Jack Sawyer and JTT to really kind of come out and put their stamp on a big game, because I haven't seen them always dominate against really good teams. And they put the numbers up and they're really good in the run. But I think this is a huge game. Like Jack Sawyer, this is a legacy one for him. This is a legacy for JTT. Like obviously with that Michigan game going the way it went, I think those two especially really want to kind of impact the game. They need to be able to.
That's a very good point. In the big games at times, this Ohio State pass rush hasn't been as present as you would like. And you're right, that number is probably coming from some inferior opponents where you can really start running it up. This is one of those games where, hey, this is why y'all came back for this year, to go dominate a game like this on this kind of stage.
And they did it against Penn State. They didn't do it against Oregon. So, like, where they get them really rocking and rolling. Like,
Agreed. Let's flip the sides here. This Ohio State offense versus, again, a Tennessee defense. Both of these teams, like the national media will talk about Nico. They'll talk about Will Howard and Ryan Day. These two teams are run by their defense. Like, this is a Tennessee defense, 14.9 points per game allowed. That's 4th best in the country. 4.2 yards per play, 4th best in the country. To me, Dill, is what version of this Ohio State offense and what mentality does Ryan Day have, where it was so painfully stubborn against Michigan? We want to run the football. We want to run the football between the tackles, and they couldn't. Do you think that you look at Tennessee? I mean, 2.9 yards per carry allowed. That's number 6 in the country. They are very good in the front 7. I don't think neither of these offenses, have a field day running the football. Does Ryan Day go to more of a little bit more spread you out? Let's use our 5 stars on the outside and try to put some points up in space. What version of Ryan Day's offense and Chip Kelly's offense do you get? Big storyline here.
And then who wins that battle on the boundary? Because this is the best cornerback duo I think Ohio State's going to see. And Jeremiah Smith really no one's slowed him down when they've let him be impactful on the game. The only team or person or coach, whatever you want to say, slowed him down is Chip Kelly and Ryan Day in that Michigan game. When they let Jeremiah Smith go to work, he's been a problem. But Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson are awesome boundary corners. That's I know we talk about the front 7 for Tennessee, and that's a really good unit. But those two are really good. I'm with you. Given where this offensive line's at for Ohio State versus a defensive line that hasn't played amazing down the stretch, especially in that Georgia game, but I think they got their mojo back against that Vanderbilt team, and we've certainly seen them play at a high level. I think that Ohio State's going to need to put the ball in the air, and that's where, again, that battle between Jermon McCoy and Jeremiah Smith, or Ricky Gibson and Emeka Egbuka and Carnell
What's
Tate.
like what matchups do you want to attack? And that's, I think, what makes Tennessee so difficult to throw against is especially with Ohio State, when you have what you just named, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka, Carnell Tate, you can normally find a matchup that favors you. Ricky Gibson and Jermon McCoy do not back up for, it's hard to take them. They've been very good. And then at the nickel, you got a true freshman in Buchard, who I think's played very well to finish out the season too. Can you move Jeremiah Smith around and try to get him some favorable matchups? Emeka versus Buchard in the slot, certainly going to be a very fun matchup as well. That's a wily, crafty wide receiver against a young buck in Buchard, who's one of my favorite players in the country, but a young buck nevertheless.
One place I kind of look at is the middle of the field with the tight ends. And G. Scott, I don't think has totally been featured in this Ohio State offensive line for the bulk of his career, but a guy who at the end of the day has really good receiving skills. I look at the way Georgia is able to hammer that Tennessee team up the seams, take advantage of those linebackers. Like, can G. Scott finally have one of those days that, like, you know how talented he is. You know he kind of came in as a jumbo wide receiver, if you will. Can he have a game where he's making plays in the pass game consistently and working the seams? Because I look like it's a young, talented linebacker room. They gave up a fair amount of yards through the middle of Georgia.
And they want. And why do they give those yards up? I think they're plenty athletes enough, but they're aggressive. Like, when they see they want to fire downhill, and some of those RPOs where you're working the middle of the field, that could be a spot. I'm kind of with you. Like, that might be the matchup you want, and that's. You don't normally say that when you're Ohio State. Like, normally you are picking your guys on the boundary, and very well. Like, it's Jeremiah Smith's going to get his at some point. But if you're looking at a matchup that you might want to attack, it might be the middle of the field against Tennessee. Last storyline here, Dill. The Ohio State offensive line's been like topsy-turvy, obviously struggling with injuries. I thought it looked very solid against Indiana, not so much against Michigan. Tennessee probably splits the middle there because this Tennessee defensive line is no joke. Now, you look at the tackle play. Obviously, moving Donovan out to tackle versus a guy like James Pierce or Joshua Josephs, that's certainly a matchup to look at. But then also some of the movement you've seen on the inside of the offensive line against guys like Amari Thomas or Omar Norman Lott. That's another matchup that you're looking at too. Like we talked about Ohio State's pass rush. Tennessee sacking the quarterback 8% of the time. That's top 25 in the country too. So it's a very good pass rush that needs to hold up against, again, I think Ohio State's offensive line, when you have question marks about them, is against elite caliber defensive lines like you saw against Michigan and like what you might see against Tennessee. I think
I think part of that's going to be the run game, and if Ohio State can do a better job of calling a run scheme than they did against Michigan, where I've heard like the kind of quip like, well, they just called a bunch of zone base run attacks against Michigan, and they just didn't have the guys to execute that. Like, can they use some more of those trap block kind of not formations, but like schemes against a really aggressive Tennessee team? Because I do think you want if you're Ohio State, you want to be able to run the ball at least a little bit.
Yeah, just at the very least to stay out of those third and longs. 100%. That's not what you want.
We've seen Ohio State run really creative schemes like against Penn State. I thought they did a really good job. They incorporated some option plays, some speed options, some zone reads. Like, they have that in their bag. I do think that's going to be something like Chip and Ryan Day are going to have to get out of their shell and be a little bit more.
That's one other storyline I think is very much worth noting is both of these coaching staffs that are very, very good coaching staffs get almost 2 weeks to prepare for this one, which matters. And Ryan Day and Chip are going to be in the lab trying to figure out, like, hey, what can we do to get after very good Tennessee defense? And Josh Heupel and his crew going to be doing the same thing. Dill, getting into the pick here, the about a touchdown favorite for Ohio State at home here. I'll give you the T-box first. Who you got?
I mean, I like Tennessee to cover the 7.
Me too.
Would probably pick Tennessee to win this game outright just because of what we saw from Ohio State in that last game. And again, if Tennessee's defensive line doesn't take a huge backseat, if any, to Michigan's, I think they have a better secondary as well. I look at that. I am very interested to see how Ohio State kind of recovers from that game and puts it behind them and moves on, because that was a jarring loss at the end of the day. Like, that Arkansas loss, at Arkansas for Tennessee is not a good loss, but it didn't feel the same way as that Michigan or Ohio State
Yeah,
loss.
that part of the question is like Ohio State getting the backs off the mat. That's certainly a question.
We've seen them do it before. They did it in 2022. So
yeah, and we all know like what this team can be. Like there's my opinion of Ohio State doesn't really change in terms of what their ceiling is losing to Michigan. Like this is still a team that can win a national championship, just like the same way I feel about Tennessee after they lost to Arkansas. Like the ceilings of these teams are awfully high. Dill, I'm going to take Tennessee in the points here, but I'm not going to be as confident with you in terms of Tennessee winning. Man, it is going to be hard to go.
Now, Michigan Brad here, so I do have a little bias in my blood, but I like the Vols. I've liked them all year.
You have like, in fairness, you have like Tennessee all year. That is very true. This is gonna be such a sick game. I'm very excited for. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, let it fly in the comments section. We'll be doing plenty of deep dives into this football game over the next couple of weeks. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.